All right, well, let's get going. We're happy to have this gathering tonight, this Consciousness Cafe gathering on the subject of reincarnation. Neeraj and I are going to lead this. Neeraj, as you might guess from his name, has an Indian background from India, right?
Yep.
We'll have you talk a little bit about that. Neeraj is going to talk about I guess primarily the Hindu view of some of the historic religious perspectives on reincarnation. I'm going to spend a little time talking about contemporary evidence that supports the notion that this is a legitimate phenomena. And then we will have a little conversation about, well, if this is true, what are the implications? And I think based on the people who are here, we probably have a number of folks who have some well-formed ideas on that subject. So we welcome everybody's involvement in that conversation. So let's get started. Neeraj, do you want to pick it up from here?
Sure, I'll be happy to. Well, welcome here at Consciousness Cafe. I've met and interacted with a few of you in the Open Spirituality conference that we've had, a couple of them now. I remember Nancy, I think, Mark, obviously, Sheila, and a few other folks whose name and face I don't completely put together, but I think we have spoken before. So welcome back. As Jim said, I came from India about 21 years ago, been living in the US since then. My birth religion, I'm not religious anymore. So and we'll talk about a little bit about how that transformation or that change also happens as you understand the whole rebirth concept. But again, that's my own personal journey that I don't consider myself to be in any organized religion anymore. So again, I'll talk about the Hindu concept of reincarnation as well as the Buddhist concept that I've read and studied extensively. Both are similar but not the same. And then we can always, discuss a little bit more about the subtleties that are involved in the two, and how do they relate to the modern, scientific world, which has used a lot of those concepps that the mystics and the meditators found in someone's phone I heard a loud echo. So if you can go on mute, that'll be good. So the Hindu concept of rebirth or reincarnation stems from the fact that the Hindus believe that the ultimate aim is to gain what we call moksha, or moksha is in real terms freedom from the cycle of rebirth. So it's like a kind of a self-rotating thing. So you keep getting reborn because of your past karmas and the fact that the soul needs to elevate to reach to a stage where it kind of melts into the supreme, and all the steps that you have taken in your previous lives affect how you're born or what you're born into. But the soul somehow knows that it needs to reach this stage and learns from its previous births to reach that stage of moksha. And there's a concept of sanskara or samsara, as some of the English literature says, which is the actual steps that you've taken. So your sanskars or your work or your karma, that a lot of people here in the US like to call that, which is just work. Karma just means work. Karma is actually a non-spiritual term. Karma is to do any work. So if I'm digging the soil, it's also karma. But the samsaras, the togetherness of those consequences of those work would lead you to the next birth. So that's the Hindu philosophy. That's the Hindu philosophy of birth, reincarnation. And again, the reincarnation can happen to a lower sense of consciousness. So you could potentially reincarnate as a non-human being in your next birth, if your tendencies are such. Does it happen in the evolutionary tree? I don't know, but I would think that as human tree evolves, it's less and less likelihood that a human will reincarnate to a lower level. But again, it's all possible, and it's all there in the books. So there's nothing that, I have to not believe that. And any questions now, anything that, just feel free to raise your hands and question me on that term. So again, there is a concept of how you're, at the time of life is totally dependent on the karma you've done on your life. So a lot of people, can equate that to hell or heaven, which is, your state of mind, how you are at that time. And there's portions of your existence that, will come to you. At the time of dying, you will go through that, stage of remembering everything. The movies talk about it all the time. I guess that's where it comes from. But the Hindu philosophy is that your life goes through it, and then you will be judged on, in some ways, on your karma, and when you get reborn.
Neeraj, I have a question for you. So in the Hindu way of seeing things, you're progressing through and working on things. Yes. Was there a starting point for everybody? What's the Hindu perspective on how does a person get started on this?
Yeah, so again, it's a cyclical. So in Hindu religion, it's cyclical. So it has not happened just once. It keeps happening over and over again. So the universe gets created, entities get created, and then another. So there's a larger cycle of life that goes through, and you are in part of that larger cycle where you're rotating from one life to another, again, with the ultimate aim to get moksha, which is freedom from the cycle of rebirth. So, the big concept being, there's a concept called Purusha. Purusha means, it's also called a man, but in a more generic way, the Purusha is like God. So, you are like a seed or a segment of that larger God, and you are going through that life to kind of realize that you are part of that God. So again, very similar to the Buddhist concept of enlightenment, which is, you are here to realize the self itself. So your main purpose in life, according to Buddhists, is to gain enlightenment, which is to realize who you are. So in Hinduism, it's, again, like I said, the fact that you reach that stage of moksha, which is the Buddhist term being nirvana, again, similar concept, but not the same, is to get yourself out from the cycle of rebirths.
Sheila's got her hand raised.
Yes, Sheila. You're still on mute.
Sorry, I do that all the time. Anyway, it seems like there's a progression in the Hindu way of life, and as you progress through this incarnation, is there any sort of measuring stick? I mean, how do you know how well you're doing?
That's true for nearly every spiritual path that one can take. There is, you are the best judge of yourself, right? The fact that you're progressing is the fact that you are getting more perfect as a person, which means that you are steeped in love, you are getting to be more tolerant, you are, all the things that you find divine are being reflected out of you. So the more you're closer to the divine, the more divine like you are. So again, there is no, of course, the masters, the people who have already reached that stage, logically can identify a person who's in that path. So that's why the whole concept of the guru shishya concept of how progression happens in a spiritual life in India is very, very, very rampant. It is the biggest thing that has come out from the Hindu religion is the fact that the transformation is affected through the guru, and the guru kind of makes sure that you can see the guru in yourself, and that transformation is the key here. So can I at any stage say, hey, I'm on my way? No, but there is there is, levels of things that you realize in yourself that, again, if you are truthful, you will know where you are. And again, it's a lifelong seeking. It's not something that, hey, after 3 years of sitting in the Himalayas and meditating, I'll be enlightened. It's the same concept. No, you could be sitting there forever and not get enlightened, whereas you could be working as a waiter in a restaurant and be much closer. So it's just the way things are.
Well, Neeraj, I've got another question for you. When we reincarnate, we have work to do when we come back in.
Yep.
Is that work something that we decide what we want to work on, or is that something that some outside spiritual source determines that we've got to work on that?
I think the purpose is within us. I think the purpose is there. Again, it's, if you were to believe that we are entities that are already there, and all we got to do is realize it, then there's nobody telling us to do anything. It's already there. We're already an enlightened being. It's just that we need to realize it. So the work that we do is, again, derived from the past decisions that we made in terms of why we are here. We do tend to have, and even some, like, how come some people are so blessed in certain ways? Like, you have a child who's so compassionate versus you have somebody who's not. And all of those things can be said, hey, he's got the genes, or he or she has got, certain attributes. But in some ways, those attributes are related to the mind consciousness that you're carrying. So again, if I can, me being kind of scientific in that sense of spirituality, I tend to kind of interchange things. So you could say I have a spirit, or you could say I have a mind consciousness. So a mind consciousness has to come from, it would have reached its stage from somewhere. So if you were to interchange spirit with mind consciousness, it has learned something for where it is now. It can't have just come by itself. It has to be grown. So again, you're spiritually growing or your mind consciousnessly growing. There has to be a purpose behind it. And a lot of it, purpose is self-decided in your birth. And a lot of people who are born in certain ways do actually have decided to be born in such ways. Others haven't had that. Again, that's a very central concept to both Hinduism and Buddhism, is that you don't necessarily control where you go next. You can influence it in the term, like, for example, in a Buddhist concept, there's a concept called the Bardo. The Bardos are 4 different Bardos. Again, you depending on different versions of Buddhism, you could say there are the 4 different stages. Sorry, Sheila, you have your hand raised again. You're on mute again.
Yeah, it's me again, and I was on mute again. I can't get past that. Anyway, well, it's because Jim keeps muting me. Somebody keeps muting me. I don't know why. Anyway, we were talking about, in a different group, we were talking about enlightenment the other night. And, I had a kind of a different point of view from one of the other participants. And the other participant was saying that when you're enlightened, you will know it. And there are people who are enlightened and they know it. And my argument was, well, I don't think that anybody who says they're enlightened is telling the truth. I think it's a journey, and I don't think you ever really know when you're finished, because it's part of the process.
That is true. Again, in the reams of Buddhist scripts and manuscripts, there is again an enlightened master can recognize it, but you yourself, where you are, again, there are different levels, obviously. So the ultimate Buddha that we all know and hear about was the know-it-all. He was like the what do you call, the super stage of enlightenment. So there are lower stages. Again, an enlightened being doesn't mean that they're fully awakened. So you have a sense of enlightenment, and then you have a sense of awakeness. So the fully awakened one is what everybody is, again, trying to attain, even in the Buddhist religion or in their philosophy. So you could be enlightened, but you're still not fully awakened. So there's a little big difference there. Yes.
That makes sense to me. I would guess that most people who participate in this type of conversation, people here tonight, relative to people who wouldn't have any interest in this, are probably a little more enlightened. So it's a continuum, maybe, that we use that term enlightened as, in a way, saying that's the end point, but really there are all kinds of gradations in between.
It's certainly not a light bulb. It's certainly not, again, we get kind of blown away by the whole, hey, Buddha was sitting under the Bodhisattva tree and then enlightenment happened. That was actually the fully awakeness. That's when all the mysteries of the universe were unfolded. The Buddha realized that he had been born thousands of times, and he actually was able to recognize each and every birth and what happened and so on and so forth. That is one extreme sense of, awakeness, which basically he had literally merged into the big, super consciousness, as we call it. But that is not it. It is like you said, it is on a spectrum, and it is really a path, and it's really a set of things. And again, you can also look at it as an evolution of the mind consciousness. You can think, okay, I used to think like that when I was younger, and now I don't. Is that just experience, or is it also that some realization has happened? But you could be totally still stuck where you were when you were a kid for a certain amount of things. So those things have yet to kind of increase on you. And it's really some kind of, whether you call it intuition or wisdom or the wise man or the spirit, or there is always that sense of, work that needs to be done in some ways. And as long as you keep doing it, you're on the right path. And you shouldn't worry about whether I'm enlightened or not, whether it's just going to happen. It's the philosophy is that, again, just like a mango tree. And again, we Indians are very fond of mangoes. When it is ripe, and it is when it fully ripe and sweetened, it will fall off the branch. So you don't have to do anything. You just have to keep working on it. And when it's ripe, you will automatically, things will automatically happen.
So from a Hindu perspective, when you die, are you much more now aware of these past lives and able to kind of judge for your non-physical self where you stand on the spectrum?
I think there's less literature in Hindu about that. I think it's more contemporary Buddhist philosophy that talks a lot about, those states. In Hindu philosophy, it is, like I said, a lot of emphasis is paid on the karma, the karmic process. So it's like a ring you enter, and there is not much that you can do about it. So that's why a typical Hindu is very concerned about, the whole sanctity. I always think different religions have like different central points. I think Hinduism is all about the sanctity of things. So that's why the rituals are very, very elaborate. They're very, very deep-minded. And again, if you were to take the example of Buddhism, I think it's a lot on, wisdom and compassion. And I think, again, not knowing too much about Christianity, I think it's a lot about on forgiveness and love. So every religion kind of has like that central focus where the rest of the things are built on. And again, Hindus tend to think about karma as a main draw, to just keep doing good karmas, and eventually the fruit of that would be that you would run out. And again, if you have a sense of detachment, so there's another big concept that is very common to both Hindu and Buddhist philosophy, is about detachment, or the lack of attachment to things. So if you are detached and you are doing good karma, and you have the will and love for the divine, you will eventually merge into it, which again can also be thought of as freedom from the cycle of rebirths. Agatha, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on what you were saying before about the enlightenment. To me, what I experience is that it comes and goes. At moments, I really feel present, and then my human life comes back and takes everything, all the spectrum, you know, and I'm okay with it as long as I can experience it coming, and I can be present for it, and I can acknowledge it. Oh, I'm here, I'm conscious. Yeah. And in the next 5 minutes, boom, it's over.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the whole point. The point is to be in the present and have that consciousness, you know, more and more into your life. Again, compassion starts at home. Again, if you cannot be compassionate to yourself, then it's very difficult to be compassionate to the rest of the world. So be compassionate. It's not always going to be, you know, smooth sailing in this path. It's, you know, there's always choppy waters, and it's always, you know, it's always great when you realize after you've done it that you actually stayed in the moment, that you actually did not get out of it. And the more moments you have, the more, you know, happier you are in that path, because it's really transforming you as an individual. Like I said, the whole concept is to find the divine in you, right? And the more of those such qualities you see in yourself, that's the self-evaluation. That's your way of knowing that you are in the right path.
Can you take a moment to maybe contrast Buddhism and Hinduism? What are the differences between the two?
I mean, okay, so the background from Buddhism, you know, obviously the Buddha was a Hindu. In the way it is that there was, you know, a lot of the concepts are similar. Like I said, you know, when you take the aim of life, rebirth cycle, moksha versus nirvana that Buddhism calls, I think the major difference being is that Buddha never talked about the existence of God. Like he never said anything. He would smile, or he would just say, hey, this I don't need, because there was reams of knowledge and books and not books at that time, but knowledge given from one, you know, guru to another to down was already there. So he never compelled to talk about God as much. What he talked a lot about was the path to that, you know, sense of enlightenment that we all call now. But it wasn't even enlightenment. It was just, for him, it was the middle path to, you know, he would compare it to crossing the river, crossing the other side. And what the other side was for him was for you to experience. He didn't talk about, hey, once you reach the stage, you're going to be blah, 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 X and Y, Z. He kept the emphasis on all the things that are needed to get to that state of mind. Again, mind was always the central focus. Whereas a lot of Hindu thing is all about God and, you know, that super spirit. And for Buddha, he always came back to the mind, right? The mind is where things were. And so in that way, I think, not surprisingly, a lot of modern philosophies have a lot of Buddhist concepts that have been integrated into them, largely because of the central theme being the mind. I think that's the biggest difference.
Yeah, what I find interesting in both philosophies, contrasting with Christianity, is that there is this notion that you're progressing back to the divine.
Yes.
Whereas Christianity seems to maintain this separation. You know, yes, we die, and if we've been good, we go to heaven. Yeah. But there isn't a direct linkage between divine and us.
Again, not knowing too much about Christianity, but I think a lot of it is also like, you know, is that work being done by you, or is that work being done by somebody else on behalf of you? So again, Hinduism had a lot of that. Hinduism was like, you had to go to a priest and they will do the prayers for you, and they will do all these yagnas, they will do the havans, they will light the fire, and all these rituals that took the person away from that central goal of finding the Lord or finding God, you know, himself, or realizing that he or she is a part of that divine, right? So that divinity is where you go away as a certain, belief becomes, surrounded by the people who claim to be the vehicle for you to reach that stage. And the more I think one does the personal experience of finding, whether it's through meditation or contemplation or prayer or singing or dancing, and there's so many. I mean, the Indian philosophy, the Indian culture has so many roots of such things that people used to reach that stage. So, concepts of yoga that have, different methods and different things that are around it. So you could be a karma yoga, you could be a bhakti yoga, you could, which again, we can probably talk another session about that, Jim, is different ways, again, is to get your mind on a certain way. Since I have kind of looked at all of those things, now I can relate to, when I was growing up, I didn't know that. I didn't know that, what I was doing was actually a sense form of yoga. I didn't even know that what I was doing was find a way to get my mind concentrated on a certain thing. I was just singing. I was just being in a temple doing bhakti. I was doing, taking the fire around an idol. But all of those had scientific of those times to kind of make your mind on a certain level and to be able to concentrate and contemplate. So now I realize that it was why it was being done. But most people don't, I think, don't realize the reasons for it. They realize the consequences. They have been told, or they have read, or they've been asked by the priests and certain religious people that this is what needs to be done. But no one questions it. And when you question something, you're not necessarily popular in that religion.
Yeah, well, that's true in any religion. Here's another question for you. So far, it seems like it's this progression that each person goes through is a singular progression. We don't have a spiritual connection where we are assisting one another. Is there any aspect of that?
Yeah. So in the Buddhist philosophy, there's a concept of Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is the person who not only is enlightened, but decides that the only way he or she, and when I say he, guys, it doesn't mean a he, it means, just, conventions that I've grown up with. He or she is ready or willing or wanting to make sure that everybody else also becomes enlightened. So their primary aim in this birth, and they are the ones who really truly choose to come back. They have the option to take nirvana, spend their time, whatever they do when they're in nirvana, which is, I guess, just going back to the source, which means, they themselves as an entity don't exist from that perspective, but they still have awareness of it. Again, reading from things, not knowing exactly what it means, but hoping that's a great place to be. They are the ones that are, consciously rebirthing and coming back to help us take us home. So yes, there's definitely concepts where people are rebirthing to do that purpose, and a lot of us also are rebirthing with a purpose. Some are just of us were just forced into it, not knowing, or like I said, we were caught in the karmic patterns that we need to fix. So we might be here to fix those patterns, to find the divine in ourselves.
Okay, I think about a healer I knew. I won't go into the lengthy story, but somewhat a man who was very dependent upon his wife for his care came to this healer and was asking for a healing. And the healer told him to be in his room at a certain time, and he went through his practice. The man had fairly significant improvement, but it only lasted for a little while. And the healers, when I asked him why it was only a temporary, his response was, it's possible that this husband and wife came into this with an interest in experiencing a dependency relationship.
Yeah.
To me, it says you got to be very careful about judging things. You don't know what might be going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Again, there are stories where, people in both Buddhist and Hinduism have kind of known, like they've been able to, what we call past life regression. Jim, you're kind of very close to that topic, but there are instances of past life regressions that have been done on people, from a religious perspective, but and it has shown the same kind of things where they chose to come in to work on a certain aspect that they had not experienced and they couldn't be compassionate with. So to get that working, either you, in Buddhism, it's simple. Either you kind of realize it, or there'll be actions that you would eventually in your life get that would it'll force your hand to be it, because the ultimate aim is to get that perfection. Bill, you have your hands raised.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jim, when you were talking about a few minutes ago, the Christian construct that God is separate and apart from us, and that is so prevalent and so embedded that it's really difficult to discuss the concept that that we're all kind of interconnected. I was trying to explain this to somebody last week, and I said, I think God is in everything, and they said, well, you're actually a pantheist, you don't believe in God. And I said, well, no, it's just that God is just not just one sort of separate super being. It's God is in everything, and there's no way to accept that. But I really can't help but think that maybe there are some segments of Christianity that are starting to flirt with the idea that we are all interconnected. There's a Catholic priest named Richard Rohr that has come up with the idea that the goal of the Christians is to develop what he calls Christ consciousness, which is essentially just to move to a higher level, whether you believe in the character of Jesus or not. It's kind of necessary that you do, but it's just saying you need to move to a higher level where you have more compassion and you aren't as judgmental, and you are able to freely and unconsciously just act on a more enlightened level. And I think even though we're doing it a little differently, maybe that we're going to all get to the same point eventually. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if there is an underlying truth to the Hindu and Buddhist philosophy that we are evolving, that these lives are part of an evolutionary plan, then it doesn't matter. I mean, if you're a Christian, it doesn't mean that you are somehow outside of that truth. That truth is for everybody, wouldn't you say, Neeraj?
That is correct. Yeah, so these are considered universal truths. And again, I mean, a lot of the things that I've said, not necessarily every Hindu actually believes in all that. There are some people who, so again, it's how separate you are from the one, right? Some people are naturally inclined towards a sense of beingness, a sense of oneness. Others don't. Others need more like a symbolic, which is, hey, God is wrathful if you don't do the right things. It is how they are used to. It's their own maturity level. I mean, just like as a kid, there were times when my parents said, hey, if you don't do this, there'll be consequences. I think that there are, some such things that have been written and said were because of, some people wouldn't naturally do the right thing. So I can see how things have come to the sense they are, but to now believe That was kind of silly. To believe that you are in existence of a wrathful God is probably not in tune with where we've evolved as humans. So just as we grow older and we realize that when our parents said that there will be consequences, it didn't mean anything. All it meant was they wanted us to be on the right path. And now, as my son who's 18 becomes more of a friend. And by the way, I was in Ireland last week, and him and I were drinking in a bar together because the drinking age of 16, I couldn't do that here. For me, it was like, hey, you better not be drinking in my house, because what if your friends get drunk and somebody catches you out? So again, those are things that we all evolve with certain things. And again, I truly believe that God is encouraging us to be more open, more evolved, and more loving and more tolerant and more understanding that is the main purpose of us. Our main purpose is to realize our true selves. And I think we've reached that kind of cusp where more and more human beings are looking for that. They are not finding those answers in conventional religions. Again, don't think that what we've talked about is predominantly true for the whole of India or for forever. No, it's not. There is still a lot of people who are under the influence of religious people who use it as a way to say, hey, we are the conduits to God, so you have to go through us. And it is a nexus. It is organized religion. It's, again, not all organized religion is bad, but there are a lot of players in religion that use it as a way to influence other people. So we have to be careful of that, and we have to try and pick out the teachings and not the teacher. The teacher is one thing, but we also have to have a rational mind. So again, my just to come back, and I'm going to shift focus to Jim soon, because he's got a lot of scientific background behind all of this, which I love, because I want to kind of correlate everything. Again, the fact that the Buddhist philosophy is that, and that's why I kind of moved away from my Hindu roots. But believe it or not, studying the other Eastern philosophies, and I've read Kabbalah as well. I've gone into Gnosticism, other Eastern philosophies, and the Tao, Qi. All of it actually helped me understand my own Hindu roots, because at that time I was so engrossed and caught up in the rituals that I did not see all of that. But those universal truths were there all the time. They were being hijacked by the organized religion that I was growing up. And the fact that, my parents didn't know all of this. I mean, they were they just knew this is how things happen, why they happen, what was the reason, what is the ultimate aim. They never questioned. So again, it's your own personal growth. So sometimes you go thousands of miles to realize that where you came from was your home. So I'm a better Hindu now than I was before, because of the fact that I truly understand it after reading and understanding the concepts from other philosophies as well.
So before I get into some of the contemporary evidence, I have one more question for you, Neeraj.
Sure.
When we decide to reincarnate, we don't choose necessarily to be a Hindu over again. You could just as easily choose to be somebody in a tribe in Africa, or a Christian, right? I mean, there's no constraint that says, oh, well, you're Hindu, you got to come back as a Hindu, right?
No, but Jim, to reach that level of being able to choose all of that takes a lot level of maturity in your soul or your mind. Your mind consciousness has to have gone through and realized a lot of it is in your hands. The thing is, we don't. So, I mean, yes, theoretically, yes, anything is possible once you reach that state. But from what I gathered, and this is my understanding, is that most such people tend to reincarnate themselves to be, again, teachers of making the Bodhisattva way, which is they usually tend to decide to get born in a certain way to help other people reach that stage. So would you be influential in a tribe in Africa, or wherever you wanted to? I don't know. I mean, it could be an experience that you want, but that could be not intentional. That could be you have such strong desires, and you've done such good work in your life that the controlling mechanism, or God, or whatever you want to call it, so super consciousness gives you that. So that could be, again, tied to your attachment. So you could be attached to a certain thing that you want to see, that you want to live, that you want to know that. So is it an enlightened decision? I don't know, but it is a strong decision that you have taken, maybe because, and you've been approved to do that because of your karmas, because of the fact that you have reached a certain level of maturity and you have done certain good things in your life that allows you to choose that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
All right, so let's talk about some of the contemporary evidence. I know, Sheila, you've heard some of this before. I think I've talked to the Path about this. There's some excellent research out of the University of Virginia. It started with a professor named Ian Stevenson. When he retired, another professor, Jim Tucker, took over. And basically what they've done is they've accumulated a lot of research into children who have had past life memories. And the ages range from maybe 2.5 to 7 years old, 8 years old. So if they learn of a student or of a child who has past life memories, they will go and interview this child, trying to get as much specific information as possible. What was your name? Do you remember the town you lived in? What was, how many sisters and brothers did you have? All kinds of very specific information from that child. Armed with that information, they go visit the village that the child remembers having been brought up in, and they investigate, are there actual supporting documents that would say, yes, there was a family named Jones who lived on Millsap Street, and there was a bakery at the corner, and that Jones family had 3 children, and these were their names. So they'll go out and they've got over 2,000, maybe 3,000 by now, cases like this. It's fascinating that these children would have these accurate memories. If you have a Netflix subscription, there is a series called Surviving Death. And I think it was the 6th segment of that series where they explored reincarnation, past life memories. There was a video clip that I watched of Jim Tucker, who got information from this young boy. He went out to the site that the home and the family that he remembered having been raised in, and Jim Tucker took a number of pictures. A picture of the parents, the house, the family. I don't remember. I think there were maybe 5 different pictures that he took. And then he went out, he picked up 5 similar pictures that had nothing to do with that family. So he had a picture of the house for that family and a picture of another house that had nothing to do with that family. A picture of a pair of parents that were the family he went out and researched, and another picture of the parents that from some other family. And in this segment, Jim Tucker sits down with a young man, a young boy, and shows him these paired pictures. And he asks the boy, can you tell me which one was your father? And the boy looks at the 2 pictures, and very quickly, he points to one picture. He's not thinking much about him. He quickly points to the one. Shows them 2 houses. And very quickly, the boy points to the house that he remembers. He goes through all 5 of these pictures, and it turns out the boy accurately picked the 5 pictures that were taken from that family setting that the boy remembered having been raised in. There's another aspect to their research. Quite often, if somebody died through some kind of trauma, it could be somebody was shot, the child, the reborn child, will have a birthmark in the same place that trauma had been experienced in the past life. So I remember him talking about one, this cop, had gotten into a gunfight, and he had been shot in the back of the head, and the bullet came through and out the front of his head. The child was born with a small birthmark in the back and a much larger one in the front of his head. So that's an example of the kind of physiological evidence, I guess, that when a child remembers a past life and they go revisit that actual past life, if there was a trauma involved in that death, quite often it'll be displayed on the body of the child. There was I've got a book in front of me, Many Lives, Many Masters, an interesting book by Brian Weiss. He was a psychiatrist, head of psychiatry at a hospital. A fellow employee came to him who'd been experiencing a variety of mental health problems. Dr. Weiss was not a believer in past life regression, but he did occasionally use hypnosis to try to regress people back to their childhood. The idea is that if you had some kind of traumatic event in your childhood that you've suppressed, it could be affecting your mental state of mind now. So with this one patient, he found it was very interesting when he put her into this, tried to take her back to her childhood to see if he could uncover some trauma that was causing her current problems. She very easily slipped back into remembering past lives. And in doing so, he found that there were traumas, much like we talked about a minute ago, traumas in this past life that when they confronted them through this therapy, they could let go of that past life trauma. So, for example, one of the first things that the patient experienced, she'd had a phobia about water, wouldn't go in the water. And when he did a past life regression with her, she had a life at one point, don't know where it was located, but she lost her life and her child in a tsunami. The tsunami washed across the land and took her and her child, and she was killed in that tsunami, at least in this past life. And he found that once she relived that, once they brought that out in the therapy session, she quickly disposed of that phobia. She no longer had a fear of water. So there's also, I remember seeing on that Netflix series a young boy he's probably only 2 years old when these memories started coming to him. He had a recollection of having fought in World War II in the Pacific against Japanese forces. And it was disconcerting to his parents. They didn't have any belief in past lives, but the boy was so adamant about his memories and so specific. He remembered the name of the boat he served on. It was the Natoma. He remembered the type of plane that he flew in, Corsair. He remembered the name of a friend who served on that boat with him, Jack Larson. He remembered how his plane had caught fire and crashed into the ocean, so he remembered his death. The father researched all this, and he found, in fact, there was a boat called the Natoma Bay. They had Corsair airplanes that flew off that aircraft carrier, that there was a Jack Larson who served on that ship. A variety of things that this young boy couldn't possibly have acquired that information anywhere, but he remembered it all, and it was included in that Surviving Death series on Netflix. So I look at this information. I enjoy looking for the evidence so that we can go beyond just an esoteric conversation about reincarnation. I find it's difficult in our Western society to get people to be willing to talk about this. I was playing pickleball last Sunday, and one woman I had played against, we got chatting after a game, and she said she was a minister in a non-denominational church. And she said, we're very open, we accept a lot of different points of view, and we don't judge people. And I said, well, that's interesting. That sounds like a somewhat enlightened way of looking at things. What do you think about reincarnation? And her response was, well, no, I think that's outside our scope of what we might consider as possible. So I didn't take any time to talk to her further about it, but had I done so, I could have brought this evidence out and said, well, do we just turn our back on evidence like this? Do we write it off? Or might there be something we could learn from that? So I think there's value. Reincarnation seems to be, to me, a fairly significant topic when we talk about our spiritual selves. Why are we here? Well, if reincarnation isn't real, then you'd have to say, well, actually, I don't know. It's hard to come up with a purpose for being here, other than in the Christian way of seeing things, God just in his magnificence put us here, and he's in control of everything. But I think my sense in all the research I've done is that we are, at our core, we are divine beings that are having this experience in this physical reality, and we take these experiences back with us and learn and grow from them. So the Hindu and Buddhist way of seeing things, my mother always said, Jim, you sound like a Buddhist. Why don't you become a Buddhist? My response is, I think she says that because it's more socially acceptable to say you're a Buddhist than to just have your own way of seeing things. For your son to be saying these things, it'd be a lot better from my mother's perspective if I said this was a Buddhist way of seeing things than this is what I've come to find out on my own. So I'd like to kind of open things up. I see, Charles, you've got your hand raised. I'd really like to get other people's perspectives on this. What do you think about all this?
I was impressed with Stevenson's work. I think that got started about 3 decades ago. And I'm happy to hear that it's continuing. I think I heard you say that. But the xenoglossy, these kids being able to speak a language that they had not been exposed to, that's pretty impressive. And, I kind of think, I always think of alternatives, explanations, but like convergent evolution and these mutations in the COVID virus, the virus is communicating across distances. And I'm wondering if there's something going on with DNA that's similar to that and that's out there in the spiritual world. I don't know.
So everybody understands what he meant, what Charles meant by xenoglossy. A child can speak and understand a language they've never been exposed to in this physical life, but it can be traced back, I suppose, Charles, to a prior life.
Perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
There's evidence for it.
Yeah. Bill, you've got your hand raised again.
Yeah, I had a comment and a question. First of all, one of the best ways that one of the ways I try to prove something is to play devil's advocate and try to pick holes in it. Not because I want it to be false, but because I want it to be true. But with the example of the person who had a fear of water because she had died in a flood, it reminds me of what the I guess the psychologists were going through when they were using psychoanalysis to try to get at a lot of phobias, and then some behaviors came out with the idea that it doesn't really matter what leads us or what brings us to where we are. We just need to conquer the phobia. And when they would teach people to, I guess, to associate positive feelings with what they were afraid of instead of negative ones, instead of perhaps going through psychoanalysis for 7 years and possibly getting rid of the phobia, they were getting rid of the phobia in something like 8 to 12 weeks. And so the question I've got is, would it have been possible to get rid of her fear of water, even if she'd never actually come to the realization of why she had developed that phobia in the first place? And then my question is, has anybody studied the possibility that as we become more evolved spiritually, that it's reflected in physiological changes, so that there might be, say, a change in DNA that reflects the spiritual changes that we've experienced?
Well, I think inherent in what you're saying, Bill, is that you'd have to have some way of determining how evolved somebody is, and I'm not sure that you can do that. You can't, to see if you knew somebody was more spiritually involved than the majority of people out there, then you could maybe take a look at their DNA or other aspects.
Yeah, we also have there's no way to measure it either with this tool we got, but it's just an interesting thought.
Yeah.
Well, in Eastern philosophies, there are concepts of your body shining in a certain way, all of that. Again, those are more like empirical things that somebody who is mind, body conscious takes care. Again, both philosophies pay a lot of emphasis on again, the concept of yoga and meditation, and diet and all of that is ingrained in both philosophies. The reason that unless you have a healthy body, your mind is not going to be at its peak. So there are concepts which show that a healthy body would have, so a spiritual person would be aware of what they're eating, aware of what they're doing, and eventually,
chicken or egg, which comes first?
Right. I mean, nothing. I think it's both. I think it's both together. And again, you could still have some underlying conditions that make you completely not be 100%, or the concept of fit. But again, those things are outside the purview. But there are research being done with Buddhist monks. I think there's Emery that did research where they were studying their mind and seeing how the young monk's mind changed over years, and the areas of the brain that have certain alignments and stuff, and how actual gray matter increases within the cell and the circuitry. It's the lighting up of the brain, how the brain is more connected as they get deeper and deeper into meditation, as parts of the brain kind of light up which were kind of dormant. So there is empirical data that's there, but to kind of measure that at a genetic level is probably something we probably can do at this stage, because our machines probably are not able to detect those. And again, those happen over a period of time. So genetic mutations or adaptations that humans go through, are coming out of both your physical as well as maybe your mental needs.
Sally's got her hand raised, and then we got Ritu and Sheila after that.
Okay, well, first of all, I wanted to thank Jim for bringing up Many Lives, Many Masters, because it changed my life. I was researching for a play I was writing, and I just happened to think, well, I should research reincarnation because that's the construct, and it changed my life. But what I wanted to say about that was I came to realize that everything in the universe is recycled. Nothing can be created or destroyed. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, all that stuff. Why wouldn't souls be recycled as well? It just doesn't make sense that they're not, when everything else is. You can't destroy anything in the universe. It keeps coming back. So that was my first thing. And the other thing is, I wanted to ask my experts here about, I read another book called You Were Born Again to Be Together, and about how groups reincarnate in the same proximity so that they can be together to create extraordinary things. And I think about Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and George Washington and John Adams and and all different other groups that have come together at a certain time with a certain mindset to create extraordinary things. And I wanted to see what you guys think about that as being reincarnated in groups or people that will find their way to each other in a lifetime to do something extraordinary.
Raj, you want to comment?
Sure. Again, I don't know about the group reincarnation, but I know there are concepts that have been scientifically proved, which are called entanglements. An entanglement being that I think Jose was talking about it the last time, but I've read it about it too. Is that you take a person's DNA out of their body and you subject the body to a certain thing, and they can actually measure a reaction on the DNA. It was something like that. But I've also read about things where people who are miles apart are entangled in such ways that they can actually feel each other's pain, they can feel each other's thoughts. So I think that whole sense of entanglement might be at play here, where people who have known each other or been in groups together get pulled into the same situation at some point in their reincarnated life to continue on their friendships or entanglement or the common things that brings them together in every lifetime.
Yeah, Sally, I'll throw a couple comments in here. There's a big difference between evidence and proof.
Right.
And most of what we talk about is evidence. I don't know that we can ever prove something. But what you're talking about, where people come together and agree that they're going to help each other have certain experiences, there's a lot of evidence that indicates that's the case. Two individuals that have written books that I'm aware of, Michael Newton and Schwartz, I can't remember his first name, but Newton found that when he took people into past life regressions, they start remembering what happened between lives. And there was a commonality that started showing up. So they weren't just random remembrances. There were some common things that, one of them is that there were groups of people that or souls, I guess you'd say. Mark, can you mute that? Yeah, thank you. Groups of people or souls who would repetitively come together and review what they'd learned in the current life, and then build plans on how they're going to help each other in the next life. So you might be a husband and wife in one life, you might be brother and sister, you could be just a friend, it could be a grandfather and grandchild. So there's some evidence that indicates that we do that. But to say there's proof, I think a lot of this, you have to look at the evidence and say, does it point in a certain direction? And if it does, maybe that becomes a little bit more a part of your belief system than if you didn't look at it. Ritu?
Hello.
Good to see you.
Good to see you all. So I want to share my own experience with reincarnation, my daughters. And if we have time, then another friend of mine whose daughter remembered her past life. So I grew up in a family almost atheist. There was not very religious, not very spiritual. So, but yet I personally had memory of my past lifetimes. And one of them was being a Catholic nun. And very vividly, I would see as if I am a nun, as if it's in the present, that vividness, 5 sensorized, I would have that feeling. And I didn't understand what that was. But whenever I would have dreams of the nun receiving this knowledge. And in the dream, me as nun is extremely ecstatic that I'm receiving this divine knowledge. And in that moment, I would wake up and I'd be very happy that, oh, I got this knowledge. And then it's like, wait a minute, what was it? Because it was given in a different language, which I still don't know what it was, but I'm suspecting it was Latin or something like that, because it was a different language. But in my dream, I knew that I received the knowledge. So that continued for many years, and I did not have any solid confirmation in one way or the other than my own belief that that was my past lifetime. Then here in Dallas, now this is when I was in India, here in Dallas, 3-4 decades later, I joined a meditation group led by a Catholic lady who's also a medium. Her name is Frida. And I went to her house and we were all waiting in her living room. I have not mentioned, she doesn't know me. I don't know anyone there. And group of us are waiting in the living room while preparations are being done. And she walks in and she stands, she's stunned, like she's walking, and she stood there. And then she told me that where I was sitting, there was a superimposed image of a nun sitting where I was. So that was my confirmation that indeed, that was one of my past lifetimes. And another one that I had was I always saw myself as a man in the military. And this is also when I was a child. And then as I went to high school, and we had what we call, ROTC over here. Something similar to that is called NCC over there. This was in India. So we had to join something that was extracurricular. So the only reason I joined this, because you would get really nice refreshments. And everything they gave was my favorite snacks. And it's like, okay, well, I will just join this. And so part of that was, because it's NCC cadet training, it turned out that I could march perfectly, where I was not athletic, I wasn't physical, I didn't participate in any sports, none of that. And here, I immediately picked up the Morse code, the marching. They made me the lead person to be marching. And I loved it. I loved that uniform, the military uniform and the shoes. I just loved it. And then they took us for shooting practice. So there's, I'm a tiny girl at that time, maybe 4'8" or 4'9". And then there are these big guns, rifles. I don't know what they're called, but they were super heavy. So just like soldier training, you're laying down on the sand,
beach maybe, or?
Yeah. So you have this target way over there and you take the rifle, first shot, bullseye, target. I was shooting, so they sent me to regional competitions. So where was this coming? So that was my confirmation. Everybody was shocked that this tiny, timid little girl, how is she doing that? And they were expecting boys to be doing all this thing, but yet here I am, and I just totally loved it. So that was one of my confirmations to myself, not that. But I had a lot of other knowledge, innate knowledge that came with it. I knew that I am here because I have some things to learn, that I'm going to go through challenges in this lifetime, and that not just me, that all of us have to face these, have to learn our lessons and go through these challenges. There is no automatic out of it. We will just have to repeat them. We will have to keep coming until we've learned. And so that it is wise to gather that wisdom, go through life, and to go beyond whatever challenges that you have to face. So those were some of my inner realizations I had, and nobody had to tell me those things. And so
I might point out that on December 7th, Rito is going to be our guest speaker. So I'm sure she's got more stories like this that she'll share with you. So if you found that interesting, please join us on December 7th to have more of Rito's perspective on things.
should I mention how my daughter also?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So my daughter was extremely quiet child, unlike other girls, very, very, very quiet, barely speaking at all. But some of the things that she would say in broken sentences, ever since she would talk about a farm and a grandmother. It's like, I miss my grandma. She sit there, she's like yearning for her grandma. And I was shocked because my mother would visit sometimes, and her other grandmother would visit sometimes. And it's like, why would she should be missing them and yearning for them like this? Because they do visit. So then it occurred to me, it's like, is she talking about past life or something? So I took her to the pictures, pulled out the album, and is this the grandma you're missing? No. Is this the grandma you're missing? No. Which grandma are you missing? It's like, the one who lives on the farm. And I live with my grandma on the farm. I miss her so much. Like, what else is on the farm? And she described a farm just like a person who's living on the farm would describe. And, she didn't have any introduction to a farm other than Old MacDonald had a farm, more than what I knew. But she would describe, and she's like, the worst thing that I like on that farm is washing the cow urine. They urinate everywhere. And it's like, she's with full emotion. She's describing a whole farm life. And it's like, and she's like, you will love it. I'll take you. Where is it? It's far away. I'll take you there. So things like that. And then my son also remembered what he would talk about his past life. I have a lot of stories.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear more. We'll get a chance on the 7th to explore those in greater detail. Sheila, you got your hand. You're next one with your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. As I was listening to all this information about reincarnation, I was thinking I ought to have a story that might benefit everybody, because with what I do with reading the records, we're in and out of other people's previous incarnations all the time. So I picked one story, and I think this is representative of how you can actually benefit from seeing yourself in another incarnation, and working with the energy around that. So the story is about a young female who came to me with an intense phobia of having children. And her fear was around the pregnancy, the birth, and even raising the child. And she had recently gotten married, and her family was around her, and that sort of pressure is with you, after you get married, when are you going to have children? So she was very traumatized by this. So she came to me and said, I don't know where this fear is coming from. And she said, I'm terrified of having children. So there are a couple of things that I check in with before we go to the Akashic records. And one of them is, do you have any pain anywhere in your body? And do you see any colors? And sometimes when we go to the records, I'll ask that color question again. So she was having some pain in her throat, and the color she saw was blue, which means this had to do with the throat chakra. So we went to the records, and what the process is, when you get to the records, you ask for any energy to come forward, to step forward, any energy that has information about why the phobia is there and what is causing it. So we did have a young mother who stepped forward into the column of light, and she was holding a sewing basket, and it had yarn and knitting needles and buttons and thread in it. I could see it, and I said, "This is a seamstress." So she introduced herself, and there was this overwhelming feeling, and I can feel these feelings when they come through, of sadness, just deep depression and sadness. And so I could see on the floor playing a toddler. And as we asked questions to this energy, it became apparent that this young mom had lost her son at 1 year of age. And there was just an overwhelming depression about that. And so I started clearing energy. I cleared both the DNA memory and the soul lineage, all the emotion that was around this particular incident. And then the person that I was working with, she said, "Is that me?" And I went, "Oh, yeah, that is." I'm sorry, I missed the most important part, but yes, this probably is you in a different incarnation. And that's why in this life, you're feeling this tremendous phobia. So, she was able to actually converse with this part of her soul, and we released a lot of energy around it. And when we came back out, she said, I asked her about her throat, and she said, "I really don't have any pain now. And I realized that this child died from swallowing a button, and he was asphyxiated. And that's where the pain was coming from the neck and the throat." And she actually now she's gone into a self-imposed period of meditation, and she's very intense about it. She's been going at it for a couple of weeks. I think she'll continue for a couple of more weeks. But she is going down and getting in touch with some of the parts of herself that she's been ignoring for a long time.
Mhm.
It brought out some other things in her that she can now move forward with.
Yeah.
To me, that represents clearly how experiences that our soul has had in another incarnation influence us today. It's very clearly what happens.
Thanks. Appreciate that, Sheila.
Mhm.
Bill, once again, Bill, your hand is raised.
I just want to say real quick, I think what we've remarked that Christianity as we know it in the West is singularly opposed to the idea of reincarnation. And I was reading a book by Paramahansa Yogananda, and the editors in that book, and I haven't looked at this anywhere else, but I'm assuming it's correct, said that in the Second Council of Constantinople in 553 AD or CE or whatever you want to use, the church fathers actually brought up they had the topic of reincarnation on the agenda, and they decided that the church position would officially be to deny the existence of reincarnation. And the reason the book gave was that a lot of people felt that if we were going to be reincarnated, that we could essentially live a life that was kind of mindless and directionless now and just pay for it later. And so we didn't have to strive to be more compassionate. We didn't have to try to be better people now. We could just wait and pay for it in the next life, which to me seems kind of stupid, because I would have thought just the opposite. If I have to pay for it later, I don't want to incur the debt in the first place. So I would not do that kind of stuff. but apparently it became an actual teaching to that reincarnation was wrong, just because the church fathers took that position to counter some of the practices that were on that point. And I think that's part of the problem. So when we bring it up, there's not even any there's no acceptance at all of it, which is really kind of difficult, but I think that's the reason for it.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Rita, you've got another hand raised.
So I thought I should mention this one, which also kind of is an extension of what Bill was saying. This is another story of my friend, just an average couple, career-minded, going about with their careers. Then they have this daughter who has a rare form of seizures, and they really work on her diligently through some specialized research facilities, where she, when she was about 4 or 5 years old, a prodigy who could finally be able to communicate her thoughts, not so much by speaking, but if you had a chart with A, B, C, D, all the alphabets written, then without even looking at it, she would, without even looking at the chart, she would say her sentences. So, long story, but this is the reincarnation one. So eventually they found out from her that she told them the story that she was one of the she was 10-year-old Jewish boy in her last lifetime, and her current father was Nazi, who killed her. And in between lives, this boy, this girl now, that was the Jewish boy, went through training of coming into the light to learn forgiveness and love. And because that boy's life was taken by this man, now this man decided that, or it was decided by the council or whatever planning that goes on up there, that he would be the one to provide her life. That soul would be given life, and that she would be taken care of. And so this child now comes in, maybe not just because of that, there could be other lifetimes, a combination of all those that. So she explained that her current father was that person who had taken her life. And so now he's like, in a way, repayment of giving her life and taking care of her. He will have to the rest of her life because she has this seizures, that rare types. So then the mother asked, well, what is my relationship to you that I am? So it says, you were this Nazi wife. So she reaped some of that karma from because being his wife. So they, in this lifetime again, they are husband, wife who had to, and then who have this child now, and they are taking care of her and just totally devoted. And she said her lesson in this life is to also love them and forgive them. So, there are a whole lot of aspects and dimensions to it, but she explained in great detail where that murder incident took place. And this child who's had seizures since she was born is not exposed to anything, doesn't know anything except her parents. No normal, no friends, no nothing. She doesn't have any exposure. And she explained this entire scenery, the village, the place, the woods, those trenches that were built that are recorded on internet. Every detail with the name of that child, and he was with her friend who was 9 years old, and how they were lined up, how they were shot, how they fell in the trenches. She explained all of that, and parents had no clue. They did not know. So they had to research on internet. These are not stories that we commonly, we hear about Auschwitz, but not too. So when they searched online, they found everything matched the details of where these trenches were built and these shootings used to take place, where they'd line them up and they would just shoot them. Yep. Every detail. So
Pamela posed a question to everybody. She's curious as to how many people have had past life experiences. It's in the chat. What I would suggest doing, and I know some people have sought to experience past life regression. Some have had maybe them imposed upon them. But if you've had some exposure, not just an intellectual one, but a personal one to past life, can you raise your hand? And let's see how many people can raise their hands. If you don't know, go to the reactions and you can see the
Yeah, you can put up the virtual hand raise. You don't have to actually raise your hand.
Yeah, in the reaction.
If you went to reactions, you could do it. Yeah, we don't want you to be holding your hands too long. Yeah.
So it looks like we got a fair number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that have raised their hands so far. Yeah. I know in my case, as part of just exploring the concept, I went to somebody who offered these types of services, and so it's lower my hand here. I thought I'd share a little something with you. I don't know how many people know who Robert Monroe was. Robert Monroe was one of the more prolific out-of-body experiencers. And he wrote 3 books on the subject. I found initially when I read them, I wasn't very far along on my journey, and I found them challenging, but I've come to see a lot more wisdom in them now than I did on first reading. Couple things. One is that he often felt guided by, he used acronyms, by INSPEC, INSPEC, which stood in his mind for intelligent species. That somebody, some non-human, non-physical personage would help guide him in these out-of-body states. But as he got to his later books, he realized that what he thought of as being an intelligent species that was different from him, he found that it was an aspect of himself that was guiding him. The second thing that came out was that he would run into, in his out-of-body state, he'd run into beings, to souls that it seemed to be a very much physical experience. But he'd run into people who needed help, and he was there to help them. And in his later books, he came to realize that some of these people he was helping were aspects of himself. And I think, Neeraj, if you read all of his books, I think he kind of concluded at the end of in the third book that one of what we're trying to do, the way I interpret it is these different lifetimes were experiences that our core soul was having. So this personage in Jim Fisher is just one aspect of something larger, and all these incarnations are things that something larger decided to experience. Comment on that, Neeraj?
Yeah, I mean, Carl Jung, I heard somebody, I think it was Bill, talking about psychoanalysis. I think he's kind of considered the father of psychoanalysis because he, kind of looked at the psyche, as archetypes, and then the unconscious, conscious, again, being the unconscious, being the underlying superconscious. He never called it a superconscious, he called it the unconscious, which is, again, if you try to relate in religious terms, it's more about, the existence of the super God, the God, and us beings who are like connected. So a lot of it was that. I mean, when he treated his patients, a lot of it was like he couldn't print it. Like he had at that time such a dichotomy of him being in the scientific field of psychology, and he is seeing all these archetypes and these, like how he called with his book Man and the Symbols, where there were certain symbols that are recurring in people's psychology that happen over and over again, and he was able to find those similarities in the progression of us. And whether you call it soul, or whether you call it progression of soul, or progression of the psyche, or again, the more you read, the more you kind of understand, the more you understand they're talking the same thing in different ways. It all eventually comes to the mind, right? So we are really, when we say the guru is within us, what does that mean? There's always that voice within us, right? And where does that voice come from? It's connected to some super, different consciousness that we don't know about. So it is the meditation or the contemplation. It is the insight that you get flooded. And then the third step being is how do you integrate those insights into your personal day-to-day life? And that's what the path really involves. Everybody who's on it is, you get these insights, and you get these from nowhere. You don't know where they come from. And, it could be a medium, it could be the guru, it could be the part of your psyche that has already experienced it, and they come rushing to you. And then a lot of time you spend is integrating them into the life you live today. And that's the reason why you have got those insights, is so that you can incorporate them and become the person that you're evolving into. So, I mean, I find all of this very fascinating because, the more I learn these facets of, either whether it's, research, or whether it's, these, mystic things that our mystics and these religious leaders are saying or have said, and it all kind of looks to me like they're talking about the same thing, either with a different sense or with different words and terminology, but it all kind of adds up to the same. I think that the underlying causation is the same.
Yeah, what I like about all this, I guess there's a degree of satisfaction I get out of life that I wouldn't have if I didn't know this stuff. If you see it as being the experience we have, good, bad, ugly, are part of something larger. People we run into who are challenging people, we can look at it in a different way. Instead of a purely human, she ain't it terrible, we can see it in a bigger context. There's no way we really know the full scope of everything, but knowing that there's something bigger is uplifting for me. You are muted, I think.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I mean, there's, we heard about, Christ consciousness. I'm sure most people here have heard of Krishna consciousness, the ISKCON, street corner dancing and chanting Hare Rama, Hare Krishna. and they also have this whole concept of the bhakti, the concept of repeating something over and over again with that emotion in itself can take you into that state. And it really, all of these things are getting into that state. You're preparing your mind to get into the state of really understanding the bigger truth that is constantly in front of you. But we are playing the role. So the Hindus call it the Leela or Maya, this is interchangeably. But the Leela is the play that's happening, the reality that takes you away from reality. It's the whole gamut of things that are being done to keep the game interesting. And the part that you have to realize is, you have to play the role you're playing in that Leela. You have to be the father, you have to be the son, you have to be the boss. You keep doing all of those things, but there is a part of you that is untouched by it. And then how do you integrate those two together to live a more purposeful life is, I think, it all comes down to. Again, personally, that's my philosophy.
Ritu, you have your hand raised. We probably are getting toward the end of our session here, but go ahead, Ritu.
Okay, I raised my hand because I didn't see any of the other hands raised, so I didn't want to. But I thought there was another one I remembered, which sort of ties in. It's not directly reincarnation, but it alludes to it. There is this lady that came to me. She was Baptist, so extremely scared of it ever coming out through her or anybody else finding out about it. But she told me this story. When she got pregnant, or before she got pregnant, she always hated the idea of ever having a boy. So she delayed her pregnancy because she was afraid that if she had a boy, she won't be able to stand it. Something will happen, life or death type of thing. I don't want a boy. For some reason, she had that inside her. She hated the idea of it. And so she delayed her pregnancy by a few years, but eventually she got pregnant. And first time she can find that she can have sonogram, she rushed. And she finds out there are twins. One is a boy, one's a girl. So she had decided, I will go. If it's a boy, I'm going to abort it. And now she's in a dilemma because one's a girl, one's a boy. She wants the girl. She doesn't want the boy, but she can't have the abortion. So, because she wants the girl. So she somehow goes through the pregnancy and all she is wanting is that girl. She doesn't even think about the boy. Delivers the babies. Boy comes out first, alive, healthy, full. And she can't wait for the girl to come out. Girl comes out stillbirth. She is completely devastated. And she just, her heart-wrenching cry out of her because girl is what she wanted. And she said immediately the whole room filled up with light, like 1,000 suns, like lit up. And this girl spirit, like 3-4-year-old child, girl spirit that came in there and told her that she will always be with the mom. I love you. I'll always be with you. I needed to come because this soul, my brother, this boy needed to come to you. And so he could be born. She had to come, but that was her sole purpose for coming through. And so because her daughter had implored to her that he needed to come to you and you need to take care of him, but I am always with you. Because of that, then she softened up enough and now she eventually had good relationship with the son. But so all of this plays into higher purposes and that souls are able to incarnate with this specific purposes for specific amount of time. And we come with that conscious knowledge of.
That's an interesting story that the daughter needed to escort her son into this world. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, it's been an interesting evening this evening. I hope everybody's gotten something out of this. Neeraj, do you have any closing comments you'd like to make?
Yeah, similarly, the kind of my screen usually shows up bad because I have this background. I'll type it. This is called the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. Great book for the whole concept of Bardos, which is the stages of life that and rebirth that one is. Kind of a handy book of what to do when, if you believe in that sort of thing. So again, talks about karma, talks about what happens in each state. Again, I'll type it here, guys, so that you can find it in your favorite bookstore, or I got it from Amazon. It's called the Tibetan
Book of the Living and
of Living and Dying. Living and Dying. Excellent book on just what the Buddhist believes in reincarnation and how to proceed in every stage. Also, they talk about how when you are in the stage of dying and death, and then it's followed by this blissful thing that a lot of NDers find. I mean, it's fascinating to read this book and then read a book on ND, near-death experience. It's like a superimposition of people's experiences on this theory. And this theory was written 300 years ago. And it's just, it matches one to one. It's like the feeling of blissfulness, the feeling of you being surrounded by love, the feeling of, hey, why am I being sent back? I want to be here. And then suddenly people, when they come back, they have this renewed sense of purpose. They become different entities. It's like being reborn within the same lifetime. So it's fascinating to kind of see. And again, it just shows that the purpose of life and reincarnation is that it's defining the purpose and defining it and continuing. And once you reach that and you're done for that lifetime, you have to continue to evolve with those purposes. And the moment you're done with every purpose and you realize that there's really nothing that is different from you and the divine, you already are the divine. So it's beautiful. It's really a must read for anybody who believes that kind of philosophy.
So I'm going to end with a little comment here. Everybody probably knows what a message in a bottle means. If somebody who puts a message in a bottle and throws the bottle out in the ocean, and who knows where it's going to end up. Well, someday when each of us passes into the non-physical, we're going to think back and reflect on all the things that happened in our lives. And this moment right now might be one of those moments that flashes through your life review. So say hello to yourself as you sign off on this, and maybe you can chuckle about that when you finally experience that in the last days. All right, thank you everybody for being here this evening. Again, our next presentation is going to be Rito speaking on the 7th. We have a couple of other things that are coming up. December, we're trying to be cautious about overloading in the holiday season. We do have, let's see, January, calendar here. January 18th, I'm hoping to set up Jen Caitlin. She's indicated an interest in speaking to the group. Jen is a hypnotherapist who does past life regressions, also between life reviews. I had my own experience with her a few years ago, and I can throw that into the conversation. So that's January 18th. And on February 1st, we're going to have Dr. Q, who is going to be speaking about Indian palm leaf reading. This isn't palms of the hand, these are palm leaves. And I know that I know one person or two people who've had these readings. I'm trying to schedule mine to occur before that gathering in February 1st. People are pretty impressed with what comes out of these readings, and I won't go into it any more deeply than that, but it should be a fascinating conversation. It's a little like Sheila's Akashic Records, only done through palm leaves. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for the contributions, the questions. Neeraj, enjoyed doing this with you. Mark, thanks in the background for the technical support. And we'll look forward to seeing you at our next gathering.
Yeah, Jim, I think Sally, you had your hand raised. Are you still
Okay.
asking? Yeah, go ahead, Sally, if you wanted to. Or maybe that was just...
No, I was just clapping. That was clapping hands.
Okay.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
Thank you so much.
All right, everybody. We're going to bring this to a close. Thanks for attending this evening.
Thank you. Good night, guys.